So another thing I've noticed a lot of people do, and I've done myself, is choosing a domain name that doesn't follow the typical conventions. And these are more like rules of thumb for choosing a domain name, because every situation is different, of course. So the first one is generally shorter is better. Now, if you haven't already checked, you'll find that most of the short names are already registered. If they're not owned by a business, then a domain investor usually has purchased them and is willing to sell them for a premium price, which could be thousands of dollars. I paid $500 for a domain name when it made sense, and many others have paid a lot more. But there are ways around this. For example, you can add a prefix or suffix to the name you want, and if it makes sense, break with convention. You can also use a non-standard domain extension. So, for example, you could use a .biz instead of a .com if, let's say, your business was all online and you were driving ads to it. That may make sense, it may not. You'd have to determine that. So that's one way to get a shorter domain name, depending on the situation. Now, if the domain name you want isn't available, there are ways to get one similar enough. For example, one of my clients that I was helping, he was retired, he was on Social Security, but he had a side gig of fixing appliances. And he was negotiating, when I came into the picture, with somebody, a domain investor, for the domain name applianceman.com, which would have been a great domain name, but he had limited funds. He was going to pay a whole ton of money for this domain name, which he may not have really had the funds to do so, based on the circumstances I observed. So I recommended to him that he could still get a great domain name just by adding a geo modifier. So what does that mean? Well, I suggested he get the domain name applianceman of and the cityname.com, which he did. And since he was retired, it was a side gig, he wasn't planning on expanding. This worked well for him, and it actually helped him rank in the search engines because he had the city name in his domain name for his business. Now, I've seen another thing quite often. I'll be driving along in my little city here, and I'll look at a trailer that's branded with a business information. It's got a wrap on it, and it's got a domain name, but it doesn't tell me anything about what the business is. By looking at that domain name, they could be anything. And I kind of did this myself. Like I said, I made this mistake when I bought my second domain for my bookstore, which was Zephora.com. And as you may recall, this is the name, one of the names in the Bible associated with Moses. So now this would have been a great domain name if I was targeting, for example, women who were Bible readers and Christians, or that were looking for books about the Bible or something. So now that domain name, they would know what that domain name means, and they would automatically connect with them. So using that name in certain circumstances would have been very good to make a connection with my audience, but for most people it wouldn't have been descriptive enough. If you can find a domain name that is descriptive of your business, that's going to help you obviously make an instant connection with your customers. And like I said, if there's a specialized word that will make even a deeper connection based on your culture of the group you're trying to reach, that may be even more important. The other thing, of course, that you want to try and shoot for is finding a domain that's easy to remember. And over the years, I've noticed a lot of very successful businesses that have stayed around because possibly one of the reasons is their name is very memorable. Now, before the internet, there was AT&T. I mean, that just rolls off your tongue. And anybody, I know when I grew up, everybody knew what TNT meant, dynamite, right? So it was something very familiar, that everybody was aware of and could relate to. And then you look at, for example, Apple. I mean, it's just now everybody knows that's associated with that company. It's easy to remember again, of course. And then if you look at payment processors, um, there's when I was working on online sites, um, for stores, I mean, there's all these processors I'd never even heard of. There's dozens and dozens of them. But, the one that pretty much probably I would think most people have heard of is PayPal. Well, PayPal is very memorable, it's simple, easy to remember, and it tells you what they do basically. So just think, if you worked a 12 or 15-hour day and you came home and were super tired and you had to remember something, can you remember the name you picked for your business after you're basically burnt out? And that's the kind of name that may be a winner for you. Now, is it easy to pronounce? So I've kind of made this mistake because some of the domain names I chose in the past for my emails, and I tried to tell people over the phone them, they couldn't understand what I was saying, and so it was just difficult. So if you're going to be giving your domain name verbally to anybody over the phone or whatever, this becomes even more important. If everything's online and you're not communicating with people verbally, then this may not be quite as important. And if you can always spell it out, are they going to understand it when you spell it out? So it's just something to consider. So along with that, is it easy to spell? So I helped a client, who hadn't gotten paid for like 6 months. He does home repairs and commercial repairs for businesses, and the domain name of the company was very long, that he did the repair for. It was like one of these warranty companies, and then they hire him to do the services for local businesses that need things done, like fix their door or whatever. So he does everything on his phone, pretty much. So when he was trying to send his invoice, which he just hand writes and takes a picture of it and sends to them, nothing fancy or special, but they never got it. And the guy actually tried to get the invoice. He called him again and asked him to send it again because he never got it. So the company was trying to pay this guy, but when this guy contacted me, I looked into everything. What it appears is their domain name was easily misspelled, so he probably sent it to the wrong email address. So if you have a long domain name that's difficult to spell, that's something to think about also, trying to keep it easier, so that people can get it right. Now, obviously, the larger companies know this happens, and some of your really large companies, they may buy 50 or 100, even 1,000 different misspellings of their names, so that when people do misspell it, they actually are forwarded to the right domain. So another thing, is using dashes in the domain name. And this isn't, I see people do this all the time, but it's not a convention that most people use. So if you tell them the domain name, often they'll misspell it or not type it correctly because they're not used to dashes. So if everything's online, and people are clicking a link, this might be okay. You have to consider each circumstance individually, whether to use dashes or not. Now, you may not be aware, but Congress passed a law that some of the military bases have to change their names. So one of the bases is changing their name to the last name of two different people, and the last names are separated by a dash. So in this case, it may make sense to have the domain name have the dash in it between the two names. And actually, I would probably buy it both ways if I was advising anybody on what to do. Buy it both ways and forward one of them to the other one, so that because there's probably going to be a lot of people type it with the dash in it, and then there's going to be another group of people that won't. So that might make sense to have a dash in the name in that case. So these are just a few of the rules that you may want to consider when creating a domain name for your business. And I will try and post a link under this video so that it has a list of prefixes and suffixes that you can add to the domain name you want, so that you can get something closer to that's descriptive of your business and shorter. And of course they're going to add a little bit, but it's still going to be shorter than some others you might get. So that's all for this one. Thanks. Stay with me as I go through some more.